You may be seated. Is that on? I think I can. All right. Shabbat Shalom. So as I'm sure many of you are now well aware, I follow a lot of the technology websites and news sites because I'm, got a bit of a hobby in that way. And there was a huge firestorm of discussion over a seemingly small thing. It seems that last week, when you were using Amazon, we all know Amazon, right? And you were searching in the toy department, down that little left-hand column on the Amazon webpage, the part where you can put in different criteria. For example, with toys, you can put in the price range, you could put in the age, you could put in this type of toy, is this going to be action toy, is this going to be building toy, whatever. Two little buttons disappeared last week. Boy and girl. And the revolution began. So, what's the problem with taking out the boy and girl button in the toy department search box? What's that? It's about time. There's no problem. And indeed, half of the argument, half of the controversy over this last week's reaction to this were the people who were saying, it's about time. Because quite frankly, when I'm looking in sports equipment, do I really need to search for a boy baseball and a girl baseball? Do I need to have a pink baseball to give to my daughter and a blue baseball to give to my boy? Or can I just give them a ball? A ball. If I'm getting a jump rope, do I need to have the pink jump rope versus the blue jump rope? Or are boys even allowed to use jump ropes anymore? Right? Or has it become so gentrified that it wouldn't even show up if you put on the girl filter? So many people were arguing it's about time. That if you want to search for Barbies and you're planning to give this to a girl, that's fine. You don't have to turn on the girl filter in order to find those results. If you are searching for a toy that you think is uniquely boy, whatever that might be, that's fine. Search for that kind of toy. You don't have to turn on the boy results or limit yourself to only the boy results. So what's the counter-argument? Are we all in agreement? Wait, we have a room of unanimous Jews. You know what? They might not want a blue one. They might prefer pink or lavender or whatever it might be, or at least that's what they've come to believe they should like, and they do now like it. So why shouldn't you make it easier for parents to help find those things, or help other relatives who are ordering from Wisconsin and sending it to Florida to be able to quickly and easily find what a girl is likely to like?
But then you also end up with what if the boy likes pink or lavender, and you have to find it as a girl. That's not really very good for the boy.
Well, he'll never know what your search parameters were. But indeed, if the boy's watching over your shoulder and you're searching in the girl department, even if it's something that he wanted, he might not want it anymore now that he knows it came from the girl department. It's just that there is a stigma, especially at certain ages, of that gentrification, of I am supposed to be a boy and therefore my things are boys, and I'm supposed to be a girl, therefore my things are girls, and many people don't see a problem with reinforcing that special time in a child's life when they are identifying with who they are or their gender. And so a little button on the side is no big deal. It might even be helpful, goes the argument.
Should be customized too. If you want that filter to say boy and girl, and that's the way you realize the source is better, fine. If it's a different filter, you can get to it faster, then it would be that way.
Indeed, and the argument went, why take away the buttons? The buttons were optional, and you could leave them both empty, which meant that you were searching for all toys. No one forced you when you began your Amazon toy search to say, before you tell me what you're looking for, is this a boy or a girl we're buying for? It doesn't do that. You get to choose if you want to put a boy filter in or a girl filter in, or you can just leave that whole filter off. And so many people argued that by taking away the button, they were taking away an option, a choice, for people who did want that assistance of narrowing things down in this particular way.
I would have to say that there's so much that people imply this is for a girl, this is for a boy. So that's actually wrong. Boys are not, boys don't have to like fire up to know this, and girls don't have to want to make them all the time when they're little kids. So,
Or when they're adults, by the way.
it's kind of wrong to identify these toys with genders. So that's what I'm saying.
So the other side of the argument, as Miriam is pointing out, is, okay, fine, you can leave those buttons in, but who's going through and labeling all the different items as boy or girl? When you come to fire truck, who is it that decides fire truck is a boy toy that will come up if you click the boy filter, but won't come up if you click the girl filter? Who is it that decides that nurse or vet or teacher, those are girl toys, but not boy toys, which indeed you do see this differentiation through the search engine results. Who's sitting down and making these decisions for me or for my child? So even if the buttons are there, it's not innocuous, because it does reinforce certain differentiations that can have a real difference in a child's future by how they imagine themselves living and growing. So, which brings us to Judaism. Oh yeah, that's right, we're in synagogue. Does the Torah discriminate? Does the Torah treat boys and girls differently? And don't tell me Brit Milah. Yes? And for example, what are some of the differences? So the Kohanim could only be men, although the families of the Kohen did have certain perks as well. That is to say, the wives and daughters could partake of the truma, the special food that the Kohanim ate. So there were some perks, but the line was passed father to son, and as an officiant, it was only the males that were officiants in the temple. That's it? What's that? Is that still the way it is now? Yes, in the sense that we don't have a temple, it's not exactly a huge major point, but in the sense of transmission, yes. So Ben's children will be Kohanim, Olivia's children will not. But she is a Bat Kohen. She is under that special perk category of being the daughter of a Kohen, and therefore she picks up certain privileges. But those will not be transmitted to her children. Unless she marries a Kohen. Yes, absolutely. Now you know what you should put in the J-Day. Must be Kohen. Aren't you glad they're helping you? But they would be Kohanim because of the husband, not because of her, indeed. So that differentiation does still remain. But for practical effect, it doesn't have a major impact on the day-to-day life of most Jews. The fact that passes patrilineally. Any other differentiations in Torah or present? What? Inheritance, right? The number one distinction the Torah makes is between inheritance. A girl, according to the Torah, cannot inherit from her family unless there are no sons. And in the case where there are no sons, she still has to marry somebody from the same tribe in order that the inheritance stays within the tribal allotment. So just like Kohanim, for the rest of us back in the day when we had a tribal affiliation, it passed through father to son, and that meant the land grant that was given during the time of Joshua was passed father to son. And in order to keep those land grants balanced and fair, it had to remain within that line in order that it wouldn't be cross-manipulated and potentially exploited through constructive use of marriages. That is to say, you wouldn't want some very enterprising family having their daughters marry a bunch of guys from other tribes in order to pull in their land to your tribe. Instead, exactly, you couldn't redistrict. It was set and it was done. No redistricting. And that was prevented by this patrilineal line, but it also prevented girls from inheriting because of this concern. And so girls were not allowed to inherit. Wives did not inherit from their husband for the same reason. I know, so, wait a minute. Please, we can have another one, yes?
Judaism itself was passed down from mothers to their children.
But Jewish identity in itself, not tribal identity, but Jewish identity, is determined matrilineally, is determined according to the mother. So your tribal allotment may come from your dad, but your land comes from your, but your faith comes from your mom. It's not to say, of course, with two Jewish parents that doesn't come from both, but ultimately, it is the mother that is the determiner for Jewishness. Yes, Nathaniel? Some of the commandments. So, indeed, according to our sages, there are a handful of commandments that women are not obligated to perform. It falls into the general category, with exceptions, of time-bound positive commandments. Those commandments which are the thou shalt, that have to happen at a particular time, were not considered to be incumbent upon women. Women were allowed to do them, but they were not required to do them. And this, again, was due to the social circumstances of the day. Because women were, as we just talked about with inheritance, economically dependent upon their male household leader, whether it be their father or their husband, they often were then beholden to the instructions of that male household leader. And therefore, if a woman was responsible for time-bound commandments, there would be a propensity for conflict between her obligations. Should she do the mitzvah, or should she do the instructions of her male household leader? And that kind of strife we didn't want in the household, and so women were absolved from having those responsibilities of time-bound positive commandments. All the negative ones, don't murder and don't steal, yes, absolutely. And all of the ones that could be performed at other times also were still required. Most famously, although most misunderstood, women, even in traditional times for the last 2,000 years, have been required to pray daily. They are not required, according to the law prior to the modern time, to pray at exactly the same time as the men were required, but during the day they did have to make their own time for prayer along their own schedule. So they were required for many things, just not at the same schedule. But is the way we practice Judaism exactly the way it was in the Torah? No, not exactly. Let's go back, for example, to that big issue of inheritance. Right? Does a woman inherit, according to Jewish law, not according to civil law, does a woman inherit from her husband in the case of his death now? Not exactly, but yes. Right? It's one of those no's in terms of technical, the de jure, but in terms of what actually happens de facto, she does. And the thing that makes it happen is called the ketubah. The rabbis 2,000 years ago recognized that their society was already changing. Tribal allotments were no longer in place because the entire nation had been gone through an upheaval by conquest, and therefore land was not the only form of economic power and form of economic independence. Women had more choices in their lives, and they needed more protection then for their own property and their own future. And that meant that they should rightly have a claim upon their family estate should the husband die, or in the case of divorce. And in order to make sure their claim would be protected, the rabbis instituted the document that we call the ketubah. They instituted this as a prenuptial agreement. It's not a marriage contract, it's a prenuptial agreement that says in the event of the husband's death or in the event of a divorce, the woman will take a certain amount of money off the top of the estate. She is the first creditor against the husband's estate when he dies or if there was a divorce. And she has first right to seize property, assets, and anything else necessary to meet that promissory note of the ketubah. And the rabbis did this because they recognized the changing social circumstances of their day demanded and allowed greater equality and protection for women's rights. The social structure during the time of the Torah limited what could or couldn't be granted as a right but did not limit the ideal that God put out. God laid before us the ideal that all of us, men and women, were equal in the sight of God, that all of us were equally children of the covenant, that all of us equally had a share in our inheritance with God. The social structure of its day, as far as civilization had gotten to that point in the Bronze Age, meant that there were going to remain gender distinctions simply because society had not advanced far enough to see past them. And the Torah tried to diminish the harm those distinctions had, which is why the Torah itself explicitly says that a husband has obligations to his wife, while never mentioning obligations of the wife to the husband. But as society advanced, as society became more complicated, and as women were capable through the more complicated social structures of having more autonomy and power, they were able to, through the protections and guidance of our sages, to gain greater ability to express themselves and be independent and contribute independently to the Jewish community. And this process continued throughout our history. From court-ordered divorces in order to make up for the fact that the Torah only talks about the man initiating divorce, to inheritance laws, as we discussed, to the rights of women to prevent their husband from engaging in polygamy, and onwards into our own 20th century, when women were granted full rights in all aspects of Jewish law and activity. Judaism has said the ideal is obviously that all should be equal. And although there may have been differences due to our society and economics in the past that prevented that, the more we can, the more we should. Which leaves me with one final question then. Is there no difference then in Judaism between men and women? Except for those that are left over? Or do we have just the equivalent of an appendix of distinction that is just left over as an evolutionary throwback? Are men and women exactly the same?
What about the get?
What about the get? Well, indeed, like I said, the court many years ago, thousands of years ago, said that a woman could petition the court to convince their husband to grant a divorce. And the courts have, throughout history, up until the 20th century, always been very willing to work with a wife that was in need of a divorce, but with a husband who didn't agree. So they did take steps to make sure that that could not happen. Unfortunately, we've seen, I don't even want to say a throwback because it is a new situation. In the late 20th century and now the 21st, we have seen some communities refuse to take up the cause of women in these situations and protect them. But that is an unfortunate circumstance with a whole other conversation behind it. But Judaism does recognize that men and women, as an aggregate, although individuals may vary, do have some differences. They are not differences, however, which justify discrimination. They are differences which allow us to celebrate what each person, what each gender can bring. So yes, a man may look at an issue, a topic, an event differently than a woman, and vice versa. That does not mean one of them should be discriminated over the other. It does not mean one should be excluded over the other. It means that, thank God, from the differences of opinion, we will be enriched. So men should not feel that they are being devalued simply because women are taking a greater and greater role and equality within our faith. They should instead welcome the fact that there is a new set of ideas, a new set of perspectives, and a new set of hands to help with carrying Judaism. And women as well should not be upset that the men aren't just getting out of their way. They should be glad that the men continue to bring what may be uniquely male to our faith and to our communities. And I'm not just talking about building the sukkah and doing Haggadah. I'm talking about uniquely, for many of us, male perspectives on issues, on our history, and on our community. Everybody is different, which is why we should not assume that all men are going to have one opinion or all women will have one opinion. But we also shouldn't assume that everybody will have the same opinion, which is why I was a little scared when everyone seemed unanimous at the beginning. Because thank God, as the French would say, vive la différence. Shabbat shalom. Page 354.